Hello, I'm Charles Malet, and this is a UK column interview. There will be notes and links posted at ukcolumn.org. I'm joined by Kevin Lister, who was working as a programme leader for Maths A-Level at New College, Swindon, when he raised concerns of a safeguarding nature for a female student who had asked to be called by a different name and recognised as having assumed a different gender. An action that subsequently has cost Kevin his job. Now, there's going to be an awful lot to get through, but first of all, Kevin, a very warm welcome to UK Column. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you for having me on.
Not at all. Now, before we get to the heart of the matter, which is your situation and how exactly it's come about and where it's going, what I'd like to do is ask you to just cast your mind back to before this started and just to give us a sort of potted version of your career in academia to that point and how you regarded the education system as going, the sorts of trends that you were then aware of prior to what has actually unfolded.
Thanks, Charles. That's a really interesting and profound question to start off on. I guess in answering that, let me also give a slightly potted history of me as well. So I came into teaching around about 40. I'd been in industry beforehand. I'd worked in the oil and gas industry. I'd worked in the railway industry in senior project management positions. But my sort of heart had always been still in maths, and I had this idealistic, egotistical idea, whatever you want to call it. I'll let viewers decide. That I wanted to go into education. I wanted to go into teaching because I was really concerned about where I thought things were going. And I had this kind of idea that an important part of my life perhaps could be in encouraging young people to become conversant with the issues that they will face in the future, and that they should be able to articulate those concerns and act on those concerns and so forth. So I had that kind of egalitarian, idealistic idea to go into teaching. So that was around about 2002. I think I came into teaching. I did my teacher training. I trained to teach maths. I've always been a bit of a maths nerd, and I enjoy sharing maths and enjoy the discipline of thinking that maths brings to a person as well. And to a community, and to arguments. So things progress along, and I get a job at Cirencester College. I really enjoyed working there. I became heavily involved with the People and Planet group that was at Cirencester College. This is back in sort of 2000 when climate camp was in its ascendancy in the UK and elsewhere around the world. And there was the first sort of genuine concerns about where climate change was likely to be going. And that this was a passion of mine. I'd been a member of a group called Daisy World and Beyond, and we'd been looking at things like non-linear changes in the climate system. And I've been involved in that for quite some time. And it was an interesting time in the 2000s. Tony Blair was in power. Tony Blair had made his manifesto commitment being education, and you can argue the toss about how effectively that went in. And I think, to be honest, it was good. There was aspects of his implementation that maybe didn't go so well, but the general thrust was good. He wanted to educate people, not just to get people into the workplace through education, but to expand knowledge, to learn, music, poetry, literature, maths, and so on and so forth. So he had a really, wonderful motivation, I think, for doing that, for all the criticisms that leveled at Tony Blair. And then, 2008-9. Climate camp comes along in the UK. Then ends as a big motivation in the education system to become part of that. And Ofsted mandated that when schools were to be inspected, that they would be inspected on their ability to incorporate sustainability into lesson plans. And this kind of reached a peak in 2010 when all schools were showing the Al Gore movie, The Inconvenient Truth. And from a beginner from climate change, that was a good movie to show. It, I think, very much underplayed how serious the crisis was and how easy the solutions were. But nonetheless, that was a start of a fairly significant conversation with young people about where the future is likely to go. And the consequence of that to young people was really dark. That was really, I think, the point where mental health really started taking a downward slide amongst young people. And then, coming shortly after that, there's the advent of smartphones and everything else. And mental health then becomes a bigger and bigger issue. And we go down and down and down and down in terms of the mental health outcomes for young people. And we're effectively in the sustainability teaching in schools, explaining to kids that the future is going to be dark. And that that you're going to have to face restrictions and limitations, and even with all of that, we're still going to face climate change. I mean, that was the message that was being given to young people, and that's a really tough message to give. And then, in the midst of all of this, then the trans movement then starts really making progress into schools. In 2015 was when it really started moving into schools. So it now plays a complete 180-degree counter move to the sustainability agenda. Suddenly, we've got this movement coming into schools where you can be anything you want to be. You can have any choice that you want to be. We have rainbows and unicorns. We can forget science. We can just engage in whatever fantasy that you want. And this, I often think was a reaction from that darker side of education. And educators like me ended in a situation where it was a totally contradictory environment that we are working in, that we suddenly have to prioritize a fantasy over fact. In fact, we find ourselves in a situation where fantasy and the preservation of fantasy in the minds of young people is well and truly elevated above the presentation of facts and the discussion of facts and the discussion of debate. So that's kind of, I think, how I saw education evolving in the period that I've been in education from 2000. Two very different periods, pre-2010, post-2010. And I think, question I used to ask in classes, when I was doing data analysis, I maybe picked some data analysis for my stats class from a climate change paper. And if I went back in 2010 and I said to students, well, who believes in climate change? Maybe half the hands would go. If I said, as I did just before I got dismissed, who believes in climate change? Well, all the hands go up. Everyone's deeply worried and concerned, but unable to articulate how they can actually engage in the debate. And they all know, young people know the future is really super tough and hard for them now. So we are now teaching a fantasy again to people who are having to deal with some terrible facts.
The standout phrase there from where we're sort of going with the interview is as you say, the preservation of fantasy. So sort of using that as a touchstone, go on now to describe what did happen, the bones of the incident that has led to your current situation.
Sure. I had a student A. She was in my maths and further maths class. And she worked hard in the first year. She didn't get the results and tests and things that perhaps that she wanted, nor the results that she was probably capable of getting. So she was probably, I would suspect, somewhat stressed and worried. Starts the second year, And obviously, just coming back after COVID, when kids now have this COVID thing to deal with on top of everything else. And on the 3rd of September, she sends me a note on Teams to say that she now wants to be known with a new name, a male name. So I immediately raised a safeguarding concern. I asked 3 questions. My assumption when I wrote the safeguarding concern, it was obvious that she wanted to suddenly be a male. So I said in the safeguarding concern, did she have parental consent? Or did we have parental consent at the college to support this? Was she making an informed decision? Was there a risk that she would self-medicate with cross-sex hormones? And I referenced the Kira Bell case, and I referenced her academic progress. And I then went down to safeguarding a couple of days later to see where they got to before I was next due to teach her. And I asked what the outcome was and what the answers were to my questions. So all I was told was it was college policy not to tell the parents. I couldn't believe it. I said, well, you cannot do this. You cannot support this without speaking to the parents, first of all. I said, well, what about the other 2 questions? Is she making an informed decision? And is there a risk she'll take cross-sex hormones? And he said, well, we don't know. So well, maybe you should try and find out. And we had a really quite kind of stand-up row. And I said, I want this elevated further. And the safeguarding manager said, no point. It's already been elevated and it won't be changed. So at no time was I told by the college to refer to her as a he. That was a decision that, strangely, I'm supposed to make on my own. And clearly the college wanted to avoid being caught at the other end of that, and whereby if I had changed the way I refer to her, and the college then got deemed responsible by the parents, and the college would then be responsible. So they clearly wanted to deny any responsibility. So I didn't refer to her as a he, and I didn't use her the new name that she wanted, because that to me was part of the social transition. And I felt in a really difficult position now, because I'd raised a safeguarding concern. It was clear it hadn't been answered. And then events progressed along. About 2-3 weeks after that, we have a girls' maths competition, an external competition run by a maths charity at the Institute of Maths. And their objective is to encourage girls to go into maths. So I present this to the class. I say, here's a test, there's a challenge, a maths competition. Be really good for you all to do it, and I'll work with you over the lunchtime to practice it, and so on and so forth. And I write as the girls' names, as the girls put the names forward to go into, I write the names on the board. And student A says, "Can I still do this?" I said, "Of course you can, because you're a girl." And I put her name, her original birth name, on the board. I'm not going to put a boy's name on it. I'm not going to. It's not my job to socially transition. I'm certainly not. It's a completely ridiculous situation. And I certainly wasn't going to say to her, "Well, no, you can't do it because you're now a boy," because that would be even more stupid. So I put her name on the board, and then subsequently, the students then had to go up to the maths office and enter. That was the class was a statement of intent to enter. They then had to formally enter. It was on a voluntary basis. So they all go up, including student A. They all formally enter this competition at their behest, not at my behest. So because she entered the girls' maths competition, because I put her name on the board, then that was me deemed to be dead naming her and humiliating her in front of the class and so forth. She stayed behind after the class, though, and she spoke to me, and she was worried about doing the competition, not because she thought she was a boy, but because she might score badly. And I said to her, look, have a go. It's good. Even if you get nothing, it's good on your CV. It's good to have a try. And I'll work with you over the lunchtime so we can practice and develop techniques and so on and so forth. Then she became really emotional and started crying. And I said, is it because of your transition and your plan to transition? She said, yes. I said, you need to be really careful about this. I said, you need to make sure you understand the risks. You said, you need to make sure you're not getting pushed into it by anybody else. You're making this decision. You need to make sure that you understand it's irreversible, and that it's your decision, not anybody else's. And she became extremely emotional about it. I said, I won't speak to you about it again, but there's the warning. That was deemed as me harassing and bullying her. So she enters the competition. I therefore then think that she's taken on board my warning, that she now thinks, well, by entering the competition, it's her way of signaling that she actually doesn't want to be a he, and she recognizes that she's a she. So I just basically now assume that this thing is going to die a death, and she'll come to reason. Later on that academic year, so this is all in September, October time. Later on in that academic year, in January, her friend, I assume it's a friend, but one of their classmates, student B, stays behind after class and says, student A isn't coming to class because you're misgendering her. And student B then demands that I must refer to student A as a male and must refer to her with her new name and so forth. So I explained to student B that I wasn't happy doing this. I thought it was a safeguarding issue, that there's no science to support this. I warned that this is likely to be a legal minefield in the future and so forth. So she diligently documented everything that I said to her, then complained to the college, using everything I said to her as justification for me being transphobic. That then led to my suspension. In parallel to this, I'd been told by my boss to go on a transgender training, transgender awareness course. And the course was run by another teacher, employee C. Employee C had announced her credentials for giving this course because her daughter is now presenting as a male, and in her words, she had directly supported 4 other transgender students. I just could not believe what I was hearing. And then she had presentation, then went on to spout all the rubbish from Stonewall and other transgender organizations. So I interrupted her shortly after she got going, when I could see where this was going. And I said to her, what's the risk of a false positive in terms of diagnosis, given the results are irreversible? And this sparked off a row. She claimed that you can't have a false positive because you can't make a trans child. Another gentleman claimed that the results aren't irreversible. It just depends how much of a transition that you go for. In which point I said to him, well, the end objective of this is a double mastectomy in women and a castration in boys. And in the judgment, that was apparently me making an objectionable manifestation of my views. When it is a double mastectomy in girls and it's castration in boys that is the end objective of this. So I then, immediately after that training session, I raised a second safeguarding concern about this teacher, employee C. I said that, there seems to be a risk that we are institutionalizing the grooming of children into the transgender movement. So I sent that to my boss. I'd already previously spoken to my boss about following the first safeguarding concern about the college policy of not informing students. And that was one of the things that led me to being told to go to this transgender awareness course. So this second safeguarding concern goes in. It then gets used to support a justification of transphobia against me. It's never investigated. It goes to the Lado after my suspension as evidence of transphobia. Not once did employee C get investigated. Not once did my safeguarding concern get investigated. So now, I'm now kind of into February of that academic year. I've now put 2 safeguarding concerns in. I'm now suspended for being transphobic. And to support the suspension of transphobia, they then go through my social media, through my Twitter feed and Facebook, and where I've raised concerns on Twitter, as many people have, about the transitioning of children, then all that is then used as further evidence that I'm transphobic and homophobic and so forth. I then get suspended, and then we then go through the disciplinary process. I have a first disciplinary meeting with assistant principal Miss Davison, and it's clear she hasn't investigated anything at all. The only thing that she investigates is my Twitter feed. She does not investigate where the accusations have come from. She doesn't consider the fact that the only accusations against me have come from student B. And in fact, in her investigation letter, she says another student said this, another student said that, another student said this. Well, actually, no other students ever said anything of that nature at all. It was, the ball starts rolling, and as it moves from one person to the next, then it's like a snowball. It just gathers more of an outer shell, and everyone then justifies what everybody else did in the process without ever going back to the facts. Even though in that disciplinary meeting, I said I'm extremely concerned about the idea of transitioning children. I don't see any scientific evidence for it. All the evidence that I have seen, it shows that it's extremely detrimental and harmful. But all that just gets dismissed. So the ball starts rolling now, and I'm now in a situation now which really it does not matter what I say or do. Anything I say or do to support my belief that the transitioning or the encouragement to transition children, anything I say in my defense is immediately going to be used as evidence that I am transphobic. Subsequently, I get dismissed, and then I get referred to the DBS for safeguarding.
For a lot of people listening, the term safeguarding seems to have become synonymous with turning a blind eye or sweeping something under the carpet. We've seen it with the church, we've seen it in education. And certainly for me, for I think, again, a lot of people, we went through school without it being a term that was ever referred to. Just go back a bit and describe what it is supposed to do, how it is supposed to work, and also specifically, because you did touch on it, the fact that the college's response was, well, we don't tell the parents. Was it only on this issue? I mean, if you'd raised a safeguarding concern of a different nature that concerned parents, would the college have told the parents? So a bit about safeguarding, how the safeguarding thing should work, and specifically on this parental.
That's a really, really good question, Charles. So safeguarding is elevated, and rightly so. There's been some safeguarding catastrophes. When you look back at history over the last 40, 50 years, and every catastrophe means, we should reevaluate our approach to safeguarding, learn from it, develop it, ensure we have a safeguarding focused environment. What does safeguarding actually mean? Well, what it means is we put the interests of the child first. We have the Children's Act from 1989, which really started the ball rolling to develop a safeguarding culture. So I was in school in the 1970s, obviously before the Children Act, and that's probably why it wasn't such a common thing. And some terrible things happened during that time. So we introduce the safeguarding culture. The college introduces a safeguarding policy, as all colleges and schools must have. And the kind of ethos of the safeguarding culture is that you, as a teacher, if you as a teacher have a concern of anything about a child in any way that affects his safety, you are legally bound to raise that concern, and you should expect that concern to be addressed. The other big mantra is that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. And in fact, in the safeguarding policy that the college had, they say that all staff have a duty and responsibility to safeguard children, irrespective of their role. So for me as a maths teacher, I raise a safeguarding concern. I expect that safeguarding concern to be properly investigated. I had 3 questions, as I said before: parental consent, informed decision, risk of self-medication. None of those questions got answered. So I have a responsibility to safeguard. That means when to me, it means when I raise a safeguarding concern that has not had its questions answered, that has been responded to on an ideological basis, I cannot in any conscience conclude that by following the expectations of this student and subsequently her friend, that I would be acting in a safe manner towards that child. So that's kind of what the essence of safeguarding is, and that's how it should be played out. Now, in answer to your other question about informing parents, would the parents be informed in any other situation? The answer clearly is yes. In fact, in the college's safeguarding policy, it specifically says that we should work in conjunction with parents. It specifically says we should look out for peer-on-peer pressure. So one of my questions that I raised in the disciplinary process was student B applying peer-on-peer pressure to student A. The college just dismissed that and said, oh no, we think she's just a good friend, without any investigation at all. So on this specific issue, then we're not going to inform the parents, as far as I'm concerned, on this specific issue. Now, had I learned perhaps that this student was maybe going to start taking crack cocaine in the toilets at lunchtime, and I raised that, I would expect the college to refer that to the parents. To me, there is no difference if a student is going to take crack cocaine or heroin or whatever else, as opposed to taking testosterone in the toilets at lunchtime. In fact, taking testosterone, a female taking testosterone or being encouraged to do so, probably has far greater long-term medical complications for a student than taking crack cocaine. Yeah, I'm not a doctor, but I think that's a reasonable supposition. But for some reason, it seems to be perfectly okay for a school to encourage a child to go to these extremist organizations which encourage girls to believe that they are boys and encourage girls to start taking wrong sex hormones and encourage girls to progress down a medical pathway that results in double mastectomies. This, this gets ideologically pushed forward, and the college policy is to go against its own safeguarding policy, not to inform parents in violation of its safeguarding policy. It is surreal.
Yeah, surreal is the right word, and you get to the heart of it by describing it as being an ideological response, or at least a response on an ideological basis. Was that ever sort of specifically articulated or admitted to? I mean, did they state outright that, well, given the situation, because it concerns this issue, that is why we're not going to tell the parents? Was that actually sort of admitted to?
No, I was really surprised when I was first told the college policy was not to tell the parents. This is back in 2021. I just couldn't believe it. And then, to be honest, I wasn't any expert at all on the transgender movement. I didn't really understand what its motivations were, other than the only expertise I had was I didn't feel it was a sensible thing. I read a lot of history. My reading of history led me to believe it was similar to other ideological motivators of the past. So I was extremely uncomfortable about it. But it hadn't occurred to me that one of the means by which the trans movement would try and progress would be to overtly develop that split between a child and a parent. And the fact that a school was actually supporting that strategy is just something that had not ever occurred to me. So when I was first told the college policy was not to tell the parents, I was I was so dumbfounded. I didn't even really know how to respond properly. The college subsequently checked with the safeguarding manager. What was his policy? The safeguarding manager said, if a student asks for a name change, then we go along with a name change, irrespective of the fact that that name change is associated with the desire to change from female to male. So one of the things that had actually happened in New College, coming back to your question about safeguarding, is that the safeguarding process, the safeguarding officers had become completely subservient to the transgender ideology. So the designated safeguarding lead is the one that used my second safeguarding concern as a tool to accuse me of being transphobic. The safeguarding manager would appear to be the one who said that the college policy is not to tell the parents and basically to support the trans movement. The safeguarding officer, so there's three involved, the safeguarding officer followed the lead of the other two without question. So the safeguarding vehicle that should have been providing that independent safety oversight has been completely corrupted to support the trans ideology. And this, I think, is a pattern that is pretty common across schools, across government, across civil servants, the civil service, across the police. The people who are entrusted in the protection of safety of children have been the ones that are now complicit with this appalling indoctrination of young people and basically feeding young people into this sausage machine of the transgender ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. And, corruption is precisely the right word. And, you talk about the deliberate split or the overt effort to split that relationship between child and parent. And it beggars belief.
If I just make one other comment on that. So I went public when I got fired, principally to protect young people in New College, Swindon. I wanted to get this on the record so that parents in the college knew what was happening, that safeguarding was not being addressed. And we'll talk about it later, but I tried everything that I possibly could to try and get this elevated in terms of referring to the local authority, to the police, to the Department for Education, Ofsted, and so on and so forth. And everything was when it ended up as a blank. That I tried to go down. So I had no option, I felt, other than to go public. What I discovered very quickly, and in the back of my mind, I was always worried that I'd made a mountain out of a molehill, and maybe I should have just gone along with the show, and probably nothing would have happened, and so forth. But what I quickly discovered was a significant number of people, almost like one a week, in terms of parents, were contacting me to say what had happened to their child, that their child had been transitioned in their school behind their back, and they as parents had not been told about it, and that split had been deliberately engineered between the parent and their children. So this was an endemic thing. This is a systemic thing across the country where the movement has engineered strategically this split between children and parents.
Yeah. Well, this is exactly what I want to get into and to extend this, because you like I was saying, you're talking about corruption, which is exactly what it is. It's endemic. It's infiltrated absolutely everything. It's been well laid, well prepared, and of course, it encapsulates those that are doing it absolutely willfully and mindfully, but also the people who are just blindly going along with it because it seems to be the thing to do. Now, we started to talk about your disciplinary process and the what it was that precipitated your departure, and just we'll go back into the going public thing and that side of it, but just to go through the process and all the other agencies that you've had to deal with and you've come across and found exactly the same thing, that effectively it's like a chessboard where every move has been covered off in advance. So I don't know, however sort of best or easiest for you to do it, to explain how each agency that you've had dealings with has in effect completely thwarted or just laid ideology upon ideology and perpetuated the horror.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Again, another great question, Charles. And I think my involvement with agencies had been characterized on my side by total and utter unbelievable naivety as I look back. And what you're saying is really quite true. With hindsight, it's clear that the game had been set. That everything, all avenues had been shut, and there was a coordinated effort to do so. And I really hadn't quite understood that until I started going through the process. So let me kind of go through and try and answer what you said there. So I get suspended on February 28th on the grounds that I have caused emotional harm to a transitioning student. And in the opening statement of the suspension, it's a safeguarding risk that I have done that. So where does the accusation of emotional harm come from? Well, it never came from the student. The student was asked what she wanted to happen. She wanted me to refer to her as a boy, and then she would start coming back to class. So there's no emotional harm. She just wanted me to refer to her as a boy. So with it, the first port of call in the process is the investigation meeting. So I give everything that I can, thinking that if I explain as best as I can, that it will be listened to reasonably and acted on accordingly. So I explain everything, but then everything just gets used against me. As I said earlier on, everything I say in my defense is used as evidence against me of transphobia. And so I get the report coming back from the investigation meeting. I just could not believe the report. It made no reference at all to any of the concerns that I had made. It didn't reference the safeguarding concerns that I had raised. It didn't reference the fact that those safeguarding concerns hadn't been answered and so forth. So and then I realized, well, actually, there's going to be a bit of a fight coming on here. So I, first of all, contact the police, because that's what it says in the safeguarding policy, that if you raise a safeguarding concern and it's not being addressed, then the next port of call is the police. So I contact the police and I say that it seems to me that there is institutionalized grooming at New College Swindon. And Wiltshire Police are massively involved in the LGBT pride and community events around the Swindon and Wiltshire area. And they write back and say, well, we can't see anything wrong with this. I said, well, the student's potentially going to take testosterone. I don't know if she's been pushed into this by anybody else and so forth. And nothing at all I could say to the police would encourage them to think that this could be a child at harm. They then say, well, if you want this raised, then raise it to the MASH, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub at Swindon Council. So I raise it to the MASH, but by which time the college has also referred me to the LADO, the Local Area Designated Officer. And that they're basically the same people. So I raise my concern to the MASH. I say that I have raised 2 safeguarding concerns. Neither of them have been answered. I list out all the concerns that we've got. The risk of a teacher being non-biased, perhaps encouraging students down this pathway. I reference the failure of my first safeguarding concern to be answered. And it goes to a lady in Swindon Borough Council, Bernice Weiss, who seems to be a wonderful person. She was a safeguarding officer. And she says, well, it looks like there's that Kevin's concerns are valid and the college should investigate them. So she organizes a meeting to convey that message to the college, and says, here are the concerns. The college completely ignore it. They don't do any further investigation of the concerns. Now, the other problem as well is that the LADO can only oversee; it can't actually investigate or direct. So the LADO basically says, well, it's up to you, Swindon College, to do the investigations and complete the safeguarding. The college doesn't come back. And because the college didn't come back and the college persists to say that I was a safeguarding liability, the LADO then says, well, yeah, he's a safeguarding liability. And they ignore all the complaints that I make through the MASH. So I see that this is not going the way that it should go either. That the LADO, the Local Area Designated Officer for Safeguarding, is not going to ensure safeguarding is taking place. They're just going to take an entirely passive position to it. So then contact the Department for Education through their whistleblowing. And I say, same thing. I've raised 2 safeguarding concerns. Neither of them have been investigated. Please investigate, will you? And the DFE write back and say, nothing to do with us. It's an employment issue. I said, this is not an employment issue. This is a safeguarding issue. The fact is I'm going to be dismissed is irrelevant, and I'm reconciled to that. So the DFE do nothing at all. There's one bit of correspondence between the DFE and the college, and that's about it. I then raise it with Ofsted with the help of a couple of MPs, Miriam Cates and my MP, Danny Kruger. And Ofsted acknowledge that safeguarding is at risk in the college. They do a safeguard, they do an inspection in January. I don't know if it was triggered by my complaint. And in the Ofsted report of that inspection, they specifically, well, in fact, the college gets deemed as must improve in all areas, every area. The one thing that Ofsted say is good is the LGBTQ plus IA club, where staff and students are working together. And they also then say that it seems that there are some safeguarding referrals that haven't been addressed. So even Ofsted completely and utterly failed. So every single organization that should have been ensuring and providing oversight and ensuring that safeguarding was in place, every single one of them had completely capitulated to this ideology. Not one organization had said, well, maybe after the Keira Bell case, after the Tavistock exposures and so forth, that there might be a risk to encouraging young people to progress down this pathway. So the college then, obviously knowing they're going to get support from all areas, then continues on its process, and I get fired. I get fired in September 2022. I then appealed it in November 2022, and obviously the appeal fails as well as I expected it to be. And then I get referred to the DBS. Now, this is where things take an even darker turn. And the DBS, again, just so the viewers know, is the Disclosure and Barring Service. The DBS was put in place after the Soham murders, when Ian Huntley murdered Jessica Chapman and Holly Wells. A horrific event where this guy was known to some authorities and had managed to sneak through the cracks and become a janitor in the school, and then prey on two children and subsequently murder them. And in many ways, that's got similarities to here. That there's a crack in the system, and some person with vested interests exploits that in the same way that the trans community have exploited what's happening today. So DBS gets set up, and the idea being for it to bring together all information on a person, such that when a regulated employer like a school, hospital, or charity is taking on a new person, they go to the DBS and see if that person has got DBS clearance. Now, where it goes really, really seriously wrong is that the DBS were given discretionary powers. So anybody like a college, like New College, who've addressed a safeguarding concern on an ideological basis, can then refer me to the DBS and say I was a safeguarding failure. The DBS then say, well, we're into all this transgender ideology, so clearly he's a safeguarding failure. So they then put me on the children's barred list. I'm then, because I've raised two safeguarding concerns, and I would argue because I've acted in accordance with the safeguarding policy that the college had, not its gender reassignment policy, then because I've done that, then I end up being deemed as such a terrible person as Ian Huntley or any other paedophile or child murderer. This is now where things are really getting bizarre. We're now in a situation where, when we do not agree with an ideology, we have a system in this country to fight to determine that you are guilty before you are proven innocent. And in fact, it's almost impossible to prove yourself innocent once you're on the barred list as well. We have got a system now that is the complete counter of everything, of every legal philosophy that a democratic society is based upon.
Absolutely, we have. Just go on. I mean, it is terrible to listen to, but just the ramifications of being on that list, the children's barred list. Just explain how that pertains to your situation, and also how it affects the view of other agencies, and also how because you mentioned to me the other day the difference between that and, say, serving a prison sentence.
Sure, yeah. The ramifications of being on the children's barred list are absolutely terrible. You are socially ostracized for the rest of your life. So once you're on the DBS list, you cannot get off it. You can appeal it after 25 years. Well, I'm 60 and I'll probably be dead by then. So it is social ostracization. It's something that Socrates had talked about back in Greek times, about the ability to socially ostracize people as a form of punishment, as a really powerful form of punishment. So you're socially ostracized. It means that I cannot get a job teaching anywhere, and any school that was to employ me would be subject to at least a £5,000 fine. I cannot help anymore at my local athletic club. So I used to help with the annual sports events. I would rake the grass, I'd rake the sand at the end of the high jump, and help time the runners coming across the line. But you need they want everybody to be DBS cleared, and rightly so. So I can't do that anymore. I can't drive a van for Tesco's. So Tesco's want DBS clearance, and rightly so, because if you're taking parcels and food packages into people's houses, then Tesco's rightly want to have people who are safe to do so. And that's important to me, because being unable to get a job anywhere else, I try to train as a van driver. I have 2 master's degrees, a master's in business, qualified teacher, and I end up trying to become a van driver. And I can't even become a van driver for many places because I need DBS clearance. And also, a good number of people who I've known over the years suddenly are questioning, and rightly so. Is there merit in the fact that I might be an Ian Huntley type child murderer? There is always that explanation, I feel, that I owe people who have known me for many years. That's a stressful explanation to try and go through, and there always will be the element of doubt in the back of their mind. It is an extraordinarily draconian punishment for a society to be able to hand this guilt before innocence, that you are presumed to be guilty. And as I said, this is done on a discretionary basis. This has implications far beyond the transgender movement. And again, coming back to the point I made earlier on as well, in our previous conversation about comparing it with a prison sentence. If I was to be, say, like one of the protesters, thugs or whatever you want to call them, they've been in the street in recent days, and I punch a policeman in the face and I get 3 years, as someone just has done. When I come out of prison after 3 years for punching a policeman in the face, it is determined by society that I have paid my debt, and at that point, that person who's committed that crime can then proceed to integrate back into society. Once you're on the children's barred list, that option is not provided you. You are on it permanently, and you are at the whim of the DBS after 25 years as to whether or not that they will accept your further pleadings. So what I'm having to do, and what I'm doing at the moment, is we're pushing this through the upper tribunal, basically seeking a judicial review. And that process has been on the go now for over a year and a half. So it's your ability to try and prove your innocence is extremely slow. once you're there, that's it. It's almost, it's so difficult to try and get off it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to get to the, it's a terrible position that you've been forced into, put into, ended up in, and I want to get on to talk about the support that I hope you have felt that you have had, not universally, obviously, but from certain quarters. But just before we do that, let's just talk about the legal side of it, because that in itself is fascinating. And I know there's only a limited amount of time to talk about it, but I think I'm right in saying that the particular area of law concerns what's referred to as compelled speech, which is the sort of the other side of the protected speech coin. Will you just describe that sort of side of it?
Sure. So I took my case to the employment tribunal. I ended up having to represent myself. My union walked away, because my case went against their LGBTQ plus philosophy. That was the NEU. My insurance company wouldn't support it because it kind of went across the diversity policies as well. And through a few other things, I spent a lot of money basically getting nowhere, and I ended up having to represent myself. So I subsequently lost in the employment tribunal. One of the things that was used against me was the fact that I was on the children's barred list. The college had no other evidence I'd harassed the student, that I'd debated inappropriately in the class, as they had claimed. The only thing that really they had against me that I'd harassed was the fact that the DBS had put me on the barred list. As a consequence, then, my case for discrimination was very much weaker. Now, the college had a gender reassignment policy. Viewers can ask, why should a college have a gender reassignment policy for a start? Within that gender reassignment policy, tucked away in Appendix 3 at the very back, was an instruction that said that we should use the preferred pronoun, and if you make a mistake, correct yourself and move on. Now, we've appealed the tribunal ruling on the basis of that this is clearly a policy that is intended to make you think that you were wrong, to change your views. The fact that it demands to say that if you make a mistake, then correct yourself and move along. Well, I never made a mistake. I'm not going to believe that a girl is a boy and a boy is a girl. And as far as I'm concerned, a girl is a girl and a boy is a boy. Now, the judgment based itself on the argument that was harassment to a person with the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. And this is where the Equality Act starts falling to pieces. So the Equality Act has got the 9 protected characteristics, 9, I think it is, one of which is the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. In the judgment, the judge referred to Jaguar versus Taylor, whereby the person in that case, a transgender person in that case, had no intention of proceeding with surgery. And what the judge said in my case, and referring back to the previous case, is that it does not matter where you are on the spectrum, that you have the protected characteristics. So as soon as a person says that, well, that's it, I am now in the wrong sex, then that's it. They have the full protected characteristics. It doesn't matter what the age of that person is. It doesn't matter what the mental competence of that person is. It doesn't matter if that person has been pushed into that by peer pressure. The judge has ignored all of that because the Equality Act ignores all of that. So his argument is that the college gender reassignment policy was basically a proportionate means of a legitimate aim. The proportionate means basically meaning that I should change the way I speak. I should act in a way counter to my beliefs to support this legitimate aim of effectively encouraging young people to transition. I mean, the whole thing makes absolutely no sense at all. So on that statement about about the compelled speech, about, if you've made a mistake, move on. Then we've raised our appeal on, or that is one of the grounds that we have raised our appeal on.
Extraordinary area, especially when it's actually written into a school policy. That's on top of the absolute failure of the so-called safeguarding system to deal with any of this, and of course leaving children all over the country completely vulnerable to this ideology and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I would say also, when you look at when you look at the Equality Act, the protected characteristic of gender reassignment is the only protected characteristic that has a mental illness at its heart. People don't just wake up in the morning and think, I've just realized that all my problems were that I was born in the wrong body. You come to that conclusion because there is most likely other trauma going on in your life, or that you've been indoctrinated or brainwashed or whatever else. But you don't just suddenly wake up in the morning thinking, I don't wake up in the morning looking down and think I need to remove my testicles and penis. It is something that you are pushed into, forced into, and the detransitioners that have now been speaking out, testify to that in the most terrible, terrible, terrible ways. The pressure that they were put under, but nonetheless, the Equality Act ignores all of that. It assumes that this mental illness, mental health related issue should be treated in the same way as age or disability or gender or anything else. I mean, it's completely and utterly absurd. We've got an absurd law that can be manipulated in any way, can be interpreted in any way. And for somebody like me, a teacher, you are always at the tail end of that. You're always a victim of every single step. And as you said earlier on, and from my experience, when every single institution in the country has capitulated to this, you almost have no chance to try and fight it. So it's hardly any surprise that so many teachers in this country are supporting this in the classrooms, probably against the better judgment. And no surprise that so many young people are being suckered into this, or have been suckered into this by the schools. And unless this changes, they still will be.
Absolutely. And that's really just, one thing we can get into perhaps briefly is in your view, is there change, and is there change of in any meaningful sense? We've had the Cass report. We've had pushback from certain groups that one might have considered, for example, Gays Against Groomers and those sorts of things. So there are sensible voices speaking out against this, and there have been some notable sort of successes, perhaps not quite the right word, but changes. But do you think that's actually meaningful at all? I mean, where is this going?
I think it's good that there's been pushback. The Cass report was a good step. It's good that groups, as you say, like Gays Against Groomers are pushing forward. It's interesting, I think, that actually some of the biggest pushback is from gay people. Many of my gay friends, openly gay friends, have been the biggest pushers, backers of this, because they know they themselves could have been victim of this when they were younger. So good. There's evidence coming forward, but there's a problem here, which I don't think sometimes that we properly understand and consider. And the problem is this: is that this trans movement is a movement that was never based on fact. The Tavistock, in a Freedom of Information request, had admitted in some of their correspondence back in 2015 that there was no evidence to support what they were doing. So they have always been acting to support a fantasy and an ideology. And they've always been doing so in the absence of evidence. So when the Cass report comes along, or when Gays Against Groomers provide evidence, or when people like Richie Tulip give their terrible testimony, that's basically providing evidence. But they know, and their philosophy is to ignore evidence. So Cass comes along, and we end up in this bizarre situation now. The thing that people like the NEU are voting to ignore the Cass report. The BMA are voting to disavow the Cass report. So just getting evidence alone is not going to be enough against an ideology whose basis is to ignore evidence and to avoid evidence. And also, as I said right at the beginning, we are in a society now that is anti-intellectual, that is pro-fantasy and anti-fact. So just evidence alone is not enough. We need to win this through the courts decisively. We can't rely on politics because, we just had a change of government. We've now got a new education secretary who's come in, who's committed, or is certainly making sounds now about watering down and diluting the guidance that was eventually issued by the last government. We need to win this one in law. We need to fight this through lawfare. And we need to go after the institutions that have done this, that have caused so much harm. And I think also, personally, we need to go after the people individually, the headmasters, the teachers who have individually and knowingly inflicted this kind of harm on young people. And they need to feel this in their pockets, financially, big style.
Yeah, I think you are absolutely right to concentrate on the individuals. I think it's too easy to look at sort of faceless corporate opposition where it's it's like nailing jelly to the wall, whereas these are the decisions made by individuals. This is what is affecting people's situations. But just quickly, your current situation, sort of in terms of next steps, what's going to happen?
Sure. So next steps is the upper tribunal have instructed the DBS to complete their review as to why they put me on the barred list by the 28th of August. The upper tribunal have said if the DBS do not remove me from the barred list, then they will expedite a hearing so we can plead our case in the upper tribunal. So 28th of August is going to be a pivotal day. So the DBS will have to justify why they have put me on the barred list. So they'll have to justify things that they have said in the past against me, that I was to go on the barred list because I had taught scientific facts and that I appear to be against the transitioning of children. These are the reasons why I ended up on the barred list. So that 28th of August is a big day. We've just been advised by the Employment Appeals Tribunal that our grounds for appeal have been accepted, and the preliminary hearing will be in April next year. And basically, the grounds for appeal are, as you said before, about the compelled speech and the breach of law in that, and also the fact that the tribunal ruled against me on the basis of the fact that I had been put on the barred list by the DBS. So that's where the two cases intersect. I wrote to the DBS yesterday to confirm to the DBS that we have now been given the right to appeal through the Employment Tribunal. So they're the next big things. 28th of August. Let's see what happens there. Let's see if the DBS can justify why I should be on the barred list, and then the appeal next year. If the DBS take me off the barred list, as I hope that they will, and if they acknowledge I should never be on it, and then we'll immediately then look at taking legal action to recover damages from those who put me on the list, which is basically New College, and potentially from the DBS as well.
Kevin, now just tell me, let's try and look at the positives. I mean, hopefully what you're describing is going to be positive in terms of the change of the situation and vindication and everything else. But tell me, I hope you have felt like you have received support along the way. So tell me about that, but also what is your message to parents and those involved in spaces where this pernicious ideology is manifesting?
Sure. So first of all, I've had amazing support. I mean, just messages of support. I put my crowdfunder up. I never really publicized it. I didn't really want people to have to feel that they should contribute to this. I felt at the time there was more important things, more important places for money to go, like Ukraine and so forth. But nonetheless, I've had, people have contributed into that, and I'm just hugely grateful. I've had great help and support from Anna Lutfi, my barrister. She has been totally amazing, and she's supporting the case now, going through the DBS, through the employment tribunal, or the appeals tribunal. Totally great. DL Law, just been set up from the Bad Law Project, have been brilliant as well. So I'm getting great support there. Parents from New College have contacted me to thank me for raising this, so that they know what risk that their children face. And parents across the country whose children have been so badly damaged and whose families have been so badly damaged have contacted me to support the position that I have taken. So I'm really grateful for that. And it would have been tough, to be quite frank, to continue without that support. At the same time, I get all the usual rubbish from the trans activist community as well, who really have made it quite clear that they want to see me dead. So you take obviously the rough with the smooth. So that so amazing support. I forgot what was the second part of your question.
Well, the second bit really, I think, as a sort of closing remark, is what is your advice to parents who have children in school, and indeed people who are likely to encounter this?
Sure. Yeah. So the advice to parents, and thanks for that. The advice to parents is, you have got to be absolutely on the ball here, knowing what your children are being taught. You cannot assume that that you cannot assume, unfortunately, the safety of your child in any setting anymore. You cannot assume that your child will be safe from dangerous indoctrination, and this goes beyond just the transgender movement. This goes to all kinds of indoctrinations that can happen through the education system, through society. You need to encourage open debate in your household, and you need to encourage your child to be able to have the courage to openly debate things as well. You need to understand the law in terms of what it can do and what it can't do, and where its weaknesses are. And if you try and push things forward, what challenges that you are going to face. You need to understand the difficulties that children face now as well. This conflicting world that has really come to a boiling point over the last week or so, with a terrible. I don't even like to use the word riots. It's this almost outbreak now, a civil war that we're having in the country. I think Elon Musk is right to call this out. We are in a terrible situation now, in so many ways. And that's an awful difficult picture for any young person to try and make sense of. As I said at the beginning, we have a terrible situation with climate change. We're going to have more immigration coming into the country. We need to have an educated discussion about what we can and can't do. We have this incredibly this society that we're forcing diversity into people and creating divisions in the process. So it is an extremely complex situation. It's never been more important, I think, now for a child to have the parents to be able to put their arms around them and say that, as a parent, you love your child and you're going to be there for them. And the child must know that the parent is the parent, and not, some transgender organization can become some surrogate person, some surrogate parent as they try to pretend. So advice for parents: it's a tough world, and it's a tougher world for the children than it is for parents, and the parents need to show that love, that compassion, more so now than ever, I think, in the past.
Yeah, Kevin, I think that's a very uplifting note to end on, and one that will make people think very hard about all that you've said. Now, before I do let you go, will you just tell the audience where they can either get in touch with you or find out what's going on, or if there is any sort of documented evidence of what you have talked about, where should people look to find that?
Yeah, so you can find me easily on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Kev's Tribulation, or just Google my name and Twitter, it'll come up on Twitter. I never block anybody. My messages are open for anybody. So anybody can contact me anytime to seek support, to argue against anything that I say or do. So feel free to contact me at any time. There's a crowdfunder. Again, just go to Google GoFundMe Kevin Lister, the fight against transgender madness. So I'm fairly easily discoverable online.
Excellent. Well, Kevin, it's been quite something to listen to all that you've said, and you will have garnered a huge amount of sympathy and I think angst from the audience who've had their eyes open to what it is that not just that you've been through, but the potential for other people to effectively fall foul of the same system. Now, what you've just told me, the how to get in touch with you and that sort of thing, will be posted with this interview at ukcolumn.org. So please be sure to share this interview widely. And if you're not already doing so, please consider supporting UK Column for £5 a month so that we can continue to bring interviews like this to your attention. And thank you very much for listening. It just remains for me to thank Kevin Lister enormously for a really insightful, in-depth look at a situation that really should never have happened. But Kevin, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you for having me on, Charles.